Thank you so much for being here, everyone. My name is Priya. I, with my colleague Swaleha, uh, we have taken over this year's organizational lead at SABC, that is South Asian Bioethics Community. I live and work out of India. Right now, I am in Bangalore, which is in southern part of the country. I teach at Manipal Institute here, and my background is in anthropology, sociology, and philosophy. And that's how I have entered the terrain of bioethics through my PhD research, which was on the ethical issues in surrogacy. And that's how I met a lot of people who are here, especially Supriya, who has founded this community for us with the very kind assistance of Indian Journal of Medical Ethics. So SABC, I'll just give a quick introduction of what we do at SABC and then hand it over to Ritash, who's our today's moderator. So South Asian Bioethics Community is a group of early career researchers. So we have people from India, Pakistan, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and we are slowly trying to have people from other countries as well. So we have early career researchers who are either based in South Asia or work on South Asia, especially around the issues of ethics and healthcare. We try to have these kind of panel discussions, webinars, and we also run a very active reading group. So where we read, we've read books and we also read each other's work. So what we also try to do here is to have some events around capacity building, but also help each other in terms of writing and figuring out any conferences or grants or anything else. So what we have tried to do is to carve out a space for the early career researchers in bioethics in South Asia, and represent our voices even in the World Congress of Bioethics. So we had a panel. We Some of us did represent this group at World Congress of Bioethics as well. So in today's session, which is the last session for the year, but first session of me and Saleha having taken over officially, so though we have been doing things unofficially, but first session under us as official leads. So today we have Ritash with us, who will moderate the session. Ritash has been a very active member at SABC and also is the founding member of RANG. So I would now hand it over to Ritash. Ritash, kindly please introduce yourself and also the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Welcome everybody. I can say it in a few more languages, but okay, I will keep it. Yeah. And incidentally, I can say it in some other programming languages because I am my latest name for myself is Digital Queerosaurus because I'm queer, but also I've been working in IT, ICT from my high school. And I'm gender fluid and asexual. For me, computers were not just a big passion always, but also, an escape from human biology or what I presume, but life has brought me full circle. I have been writing a lot about, in first person about surviving as a neuroqueer, individual, the rarer among the queer identities, which is A and P. I'm also panromantic. And also I'm, having various invisible disabilities and chronic illnesses. Okay. So, but it's very delightful for me to be here because artificial intelligence or AI, not that people don't know, but anyway, to restate it, was something I took as more like a course out of curiosity back in the 90s. I think 94, 95, I studied it or I presume I studied it for 3-4 months. Okay, in the final semester of my computer science and engineering degree here in India. But very quickly, before I go to the topic and introduce the speakers, like Priya said, though bioethics is what connects all of us, I think ethics is fundamental to many, anything in life, and not just human life, but I think any kind of, and deal with any kind of living beings, in your work, or, I'm not trying to give a preachy moralizing lesson here, but I think being ethical is as important as being human and humane, both of which I think unfortunately is sort of reducing nowadays. But on the flip side of, when I heard about bioethics and medical ethics from very senior doctors in Bangalore, where I live, is that they feel that, it's important to teach it as a subject, because sometimes, it's important for people to understand why ethics are necessary, in professional life, any kind of profession, and what it actually means, yeah. And of course, here we're talking about ethics of education, and especially in research. So, our first speaker is going to be Huda, who's also a very dear and an active member of SABC. They are originally from Pakistan, but right now she's based in Australia, doing her PhD, in specifically the topic of female genital cutting. FGM also it is known as sometimes. Then also who will be speaking first. Then I will be, inviting Giovanni from the University of Zurich, who has been doing lots of work on various aspects of AI and Gen AI, and also they work a lot with youth. They're doing a lot of collaborative aspects of AI, but also of public health and all that. And because all of you all have such interesting, impressive, and very detailed resumes, I'm only probably not doing justice, but I have to cut short the introduction. So please bear with me, and any part of your work, if I have missed, you want to reiterate, please do that. And last but not the least, we have Professor Aamir Jaffar from the SIUT, the Sindh Institute of Urology and Transplantation, and who's also qualified as a surgeon. But currently, I think they have taken a break from clinical work. They're doing, teaching at the CBEC, that is for clinical bioethics, education, and culture. That is also a part of SIUT in Pakistan. Okay. And I have to add that Professor Aamir comes from a lineage of people who are Urdu literators, including his mother. And I have to show off that I know a bit of Urdu. Aamir means leader. And I think, I would be non-judgmentally saying that Professor Aamir is a leader in his own right. So, very quickly, like I said, I studied more out of curiosity, AI, and is intelligence artificial? Okay, but in so many of the discussions at SABC, I, as a person, believe that finally intelligence, whether we call it artificial, natural, generated, or whatever, comes from a living being. And whatever, Gen AI, for example, now the most common tool is Chat GPT, right? So it is also eventually created by humans only. So I sometimes feel AI is not necessarily completely artificial. Okay. And in our times, when, in the 90s, I say our times because that time I was a college student, I was told like, oh, you're thinking that, AI is new and, studying something which sounds like rocket science, but AI has been there from the 60s and 70s. Maybe it was there even much earlier. So, but we are going to look at in this session with each speaker giving their experiences, views, and, other maybe recommendations for about 15-20 minutes as to how we can, use Gen AI, because I think it's not something we can wish away, but use it ethically and where probably we'll have to draw the line between completely letting Gen AI take over. I don't think it will, and I hope it won't, but still. Okay, so with that, I hand over to Huda. Thank you. Welcome all again.
Thank you so much, Ritesh, and thank you for the introduction as well. And I'm so glad to be here. So I will start off with a very brief introduction about myself, and then I'll get into my research and why I decided not to use AI and how I came to that conclusion within my research. So first off, my name is Huda, and I just recently submitted my PhD thesis, which deconstructed the practice of female genital cutting using a Pakistani lens. I started my degree during the COVID pandemic, and at that time, I had no idea what generative AI was or is. I didn't even know what ChatGPT was or is, and I don't even know if it existed back then. So I just continued with my methodology, my literature, and went through the ethics process, and started collecting data. The first time I heard about, I will specifically talk about ChatGPT because that's the only platform that I am familiar with so far. So the first time I heard about it was from a friend who is sort of an expert at AI, and he told me, hey, there's this thing, and this was end of 2022. By that time, I already had my mindset, my methodology set. I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew that I wanted my research, which focuses on bodily autonomy, custom, culture, and I wanted it to be human-centric. And for it to have a human-centric touch and lens, I decided to steer myself away from the use of generative AI, more specifically ChatGPT. Even though there were friends who were like, you should really use it, but I thought not to, and that's what I'll talk about. I used the methodology reflexive thematic analysis. This was my first time using RTA. It is a very creative methodology, dare I say, and it's by Brown and Clark. It started off in 2006, if I'm not mistaken, and it's evolved into much more now. This methodology requires a lot of reflexivity. It also requires researcher subjectivity, which means I was also involved in the research, not only the community. So why was I interpreting the data I was interpreting? The reasons and how I shaped the data and findings as well was important. I used a qualitative methodology, and it included women's narratives, mostly women who had undergone the practice of FGC. While using this methodology, I realized that I wanted to focus on a contextual praxis. To develop a contextual praxis, it is important to center community, culture, and the custom of FGC itself. And that's where I think some of the limitations of AI exist. And I'll get into that now. When it comes to data analysis of very sensitive data, especially in precarious settings where culture, religion, and women's bodies are involved, I think it's important to be very compassionate. That's also something that I do not think AI so far, to my knowledge, can replicate or reciprocate, which is why I decided to steer away from it because I wanted to use a compassionate lens. Um, I also felt that there were a lot of nuances that I had to navigate in my research, which included nuances of language, of religion, of culture, community, and the cutting practice itself. And as far as I understand, I don't think AI is great at capturing non-English languages and nuances. So that was one reason. And I am not an AI expert. I speak just from my experiences as a former PhD candidate who just recently submitted. So I'm sure there's still a lot to learn for me. So all these complexities in women's stories, and also some of the complications of culture, religion, morality. I think when I was deconstructing these, I realized that my involvement in deconstructing them is very important as well, because I wanted to deconstruct the power dynamic between the researcher and the community that you are researching as well. So I took the stance of a learner. So self-learning was very important to me as well, which is why I engaged in this contextual praxis and steered away from generative AI. And lastly, I will move on to talking about representation and knowledge production. When it comes to knowledge production, it's really important to understand whatever research we are producing or the data we're engaging with in the communities, that it is a collective effort. And that there are some power dynamics for sure involved because you're the researcher acquiring information, especially sensitive information from communities and individuals. And that's why in knowledge production, I think it's very important to use care of ethics, especially feminist care of ethics and compassion. And I felt that can only be done by a human being or an individual, which is why I just stuck to staying away from AI. I think by doing this myself, I emphasized notions of contextuality, cultural importance, some of the uncomfortable spaces and things that we don't talk about when it comes to culture and bodily autonomy that I don't think generative AI can capture. It's great at summarizing things and simplifying theoretical concepts, but engaging in reflexivity, positionality, I think these things can only be done by individuals themselves. Um, and as I mentioned, self-learning was something that I was very keen on. Am I now, after submitting my thesis, familiarizing myself with generative AI ChatGPT? Yes, I am. I used it to simplify a few theoretical concepts, and I was very impressed because it gave me this whole list in bullet points. I was like, wow, this is great. So I think I'm still learning new things about it. So these are some of the limitations I would say when it comes to generative AI, especially when you are engaging with very sensitive data, especially when you're engaging with communities that are minorities, because I do think a lot of the knowledge and the literature out there, it is also it's quite Western centric. It's also be quite generalized. And I think they can also be risk of misrepresenting people, misrepresenting customs, communities. And it's very important as a researcher to be responsible and to take that responsibility of the people and the custom that you're navigating or researching in the field. So I felt that was best done using a human-centric approach. So I think some things that we need to consider in the future, I'll wrap up by saying, is inclusivity, the ways we are engaging in knowledge production, compassion itself, and also non-generalization and the sensitivity of the data. So when it comes to ethics committees and information consent forms with human participants, I think we could do really well considering how do we, if we are to incorporate generative AI, how are we going to use it? What are we going to tell the participants how the information is being used? And at the advent of this information age where there's information left, right, center, frankly speaking, I think it's extremely overwhelming because there are too many options now. So I think this is a good time for us to think, how do we navigate the ethics committees? And how do we include this information or use generative AI when it comes to human participants and qualitative data? So that's my little note on this, and that's what I wanted to share today. Thank you so much.
Oops. Thank you. Technology is trying my skills as always, you know. I was struggling to unmute. Okay. Which is quite something for a chatterbox like me, you know, muting myself. All right. So thank you so much, Huda. You spoke from the heart and, you know, and such an forthright sharing, very, very grounded, so crucial because, you know, yeah, I mean, I remember, I think last year or year before, as I said, I'm on an institutional review board where I'm also on, without even anything like a master's you know, degree, I'm also in a research advisory committee as an expert member. And I've been asked, you know, I think, why don't we have an ethics policy, sorry, not an ethics policy, an AI's policy. Rather, they said, we'll have a policy for ChatGPT. I said, why only ChatGPT? And they said, because almost like AI, it's about AI. But I said, AI is a superset, and for example, I can't help, that's why I call myself a dinosaur or a queerosaur, that at our times, AI not only theoretical, but we would learn a bit of AI tools and all that stuff. As computer science engineers, we have to do programming. So anyway, so we were told that, well, robots are AI, and then and so kind of I sometimes it helps me, and I think I'm sure others also, to say that ChatGPT is probably become one of the most common AI tools, but it is not the only AI tool. And eventually, okay, somewhere, I want to connect also AI and copyright. I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but to me, mentally, it helps. Like, for instance, how much can you copyright something? Even, well, I understand, copywriting is important because the people who produce or create something should get credit and compensation, but also that like my own published articles are copyrighted, that I cannot quote them, or quote from them. But I was like, you can't copyright what's in my mind, right? You can't, copy, like, I can't help it, because, for example, if I write about, say, ethics of how you treat or don't treat queer people who come for healthcare support, right? You can't take it away from me or anybody else that this is our not only our lived experience. If we are saying the same thing or similar things or writing about them in multiple forums, you cannot say that's copyrighted, so you can't say that. So that is why I feel that even a chat GPT or an AI or whatever, however much it is able to, and then they say that sometimes you can't even distinguish whether a human or an AI tool has generated it, has given those inputs or data or whatever, or the content. It is surely that, I think somewhere this limitation will be there. And also, like you said, there's so much of information about everything, which, Giovanni, I think when you start talking, you might have to correct me, but I like the word infodemics, which you use in your writings. Okay. And it's broadly what I think we, when we were studying computer science or early programmer days, we used to be calling it information overload. Okay. But whatever it is, I think, the human or any living being for that matter, their so-called intelligence or any kind of intelligence, for example, need not be only intellectual, cannot be limited or cannot be completely predicted. So if, and of course, the other very important point which Huda said about, representation, and as all of us, being minorities, okay, like, especially, in our own country, or like, say, I think, Huda, I will take the liberty of saying that you had shared in a session, because of gender and, apparent religion or something, whether you practice or not, in a country which is sort of global north. And, we know where Australia is situated, but technically, because it comes under the global north, developed kind of thing, right? You automatically are considered woman of color and with a particular identity and stuff. So automatically we know that AI, I couldn't completely stop myself from not using AI tools, but we find that representation becomes, that there are not just bottlenecks, because eventually what is fed into those tools also is important, right? So obviously, a particular kind of, say, right from skin tone to, hair, if you're, say, trying to generate an image of a human being, right? Only that will be prioritized or automatically generated. So I think, to me, or to many of us, the ethics aspects, should consider or include inclusion. Okay. Yeah. So on that note, I will, hand over to Giovanni. And pardon me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. And by the way, that time I have to excuse from Professor Aamir. I said by mistake Aamir Jaffer. He's Professor Aamir Jaffrey. Okay. So over to you, Giovanni. Thank you.
Yeah, and the pronunciation is perfect.
Yeah.
And in any case, don't worry, it's not an issue.
Okay.
So yeah, thanks a lot. I think I will start with like a few words on like who I am and what I am doing to contextualize a bit like the stuff that I'd like to talk about. By training, I'm a philosopher. I got my my master's, my bachelor's first, and then my master's in philosophy, and then in philosophical sciences. And I have a PhD in biomedical ethics from the University of Zurich. But I am also quite a nerd, I will say. I got my first computer. Aamir is laughing. He knows about that. I got my first computer like in 1994. I had this uncle working in Olivetti, which was this at the time big Italian company making personal computers, so we could buy cheap. And my father was a shoemaker. I come from a family which doesn't have any like tradition in academics whatsoever. But my father, as a shoemaker, was already aware back in the days in the 90s that this machine would have had a role in shaping the future. So I started like playing with computers at a very early age. And at that time, I mean, the graphics interface were quite boring, frankly, and limited. So I started coding by myself and then with a friend because it was like a way to overcome the limits of these machines and to see what cool stuff you could actually do with these machines based on your specific needs, on your specific intentions. For instance, being faster than your classmates with the homework from mathematics. And then have more time to dedicate to programming or to funnier stuff. So that's more or less where I come from. I would also like to touch a bit on this topic of what do we mean by AI? Because AI, as you were saying, is more than ChatGPT, is older than ChatGPT and has different shapes and comes still today in different shapes. Broadly speaking, we can speak about symbolic AI, for instance, which is like the good old-fashioned artificial intelligence. So based on explicit rules, on explicit logic, if this then that. And this is already used like in so many contexts around us. So for instance, for clinical reasoning, if you have like temperature and your larynx is hurting, then it's a sore throat. That's an example of symbolic AI in practice. Then we have machine learning, for instance, and this is about algorithms that can learn patterns from data and use that to make predictions or decisions without any explicit programming. I think the first example and the most familiar one is OCR software, so software which is able to recognize handwritten letters and translate them into like digital representations of letters. And then we have deep learning, so a subset of machine learning which is using artificial neural networks, so this kind of abstraction of how our brains work with multiple layers to process complex data for performing like these similar classification tasks. And this is used increasingly also for medical imaging diagnostics, for interpreting CT scans or X-rays. So and in these kind of scenarios, we have seen machines performing better than humans in terms of accuracy in classifying tumors, for instance, specific kinds of tumors. And then we have like the large language models, which are relying on a technology which is called a transformer. They are statistical representations of language. They don't have any, and I will speak a bit more about LLMs because like that's what we experience on a daily basis nowadays when we, or what we refer to in general when we refer to AI. So they are statistical representations of language. They rely on the language which is represented in the training datasets. And they are extremely good at predicting what is the next word after this word or after this combination of words. And this is achieved with this transformer architecture. So basically, a transformer is it is a librarian. You can think to a transformer as a very dumb librarian who knows nothing about the books in the library, but is extremely good at seeing the connections between the books in the library and between the passages and among the passages within the books in the library. So what it can do is breaking down the text. So it divides like the books in smaller chunks, so sentences or pages or words, assigning to each one of these chunks an ID card, an identifier with specific traits, so the meaning, the position, the relationship to other chunks. And then with an attention mechanism, with when you ask a question to this librarian, it can focus its attention on the most relevant chunks, and it is able to retrieve the most relevant chunks and to reassemble them in order to provide a meaningful answer. So that is, like in a nutshell, what a large language model is. And it's important to keep in mind that they don't have any internal representation of the concepts which are expressed by language. So when we have the word cat in the output of an LLM, there is no internal representation of a cat which is connected to the word. And this connects with some of the points that Huda was mentioning. So should we use AI for thematic analysis? By the way, in the meantime, I shared like the paper that you mentioned from Brown and Clark in the chat. I will do it as much as possible when references are mentioned. Yeah, I think it's a bad idea. For the time being, it's just a bad idea. I have done a lot of like qualitative analysis myself. So my first work in Zurich was in a cluster which is called deepen. So we collect, curate, and analyze a database of individual patient experiences. Switzerland is a country, I am not Swiss, I'm Italian, and Switzerland is a country with like a huge cultural diversity within Switzerland. Because of the fact that it is a small and fragmented country, it works on a cantonal basis, so it's a federation of cantons, and like the range is huge. So you have cantons like Zurich, which is very modern, progressive, liberal. I think a combination of the Green Party and the Socialist Party has been in power in Zurich for the past 40 years, maybe. But at the same time, you have Appenzell, where women got the right to vote like in the 90s. So that's the kind of diversity we have in Switzerland. Plus, we have a lot of migration. So what these large language models cannot do for sure is grasping like cultural nuances, because we do not have these chunks in the training datasets, and more importantly, we don't know what kind of material is in the training datasets. We know that in general, we know that like companies developing large language models are scraping the web for data, but we don't know what kind of data. So we don't know what's in the library. We don't have like a general index of the library. We don't know how what sort of material the librarian was operating on. And this leads to bias. We know there have been some good studies on bias in large language models from Claudia von Vacano, for instance. She's based in Berkeley, and she's been working both like on large language models, but also on transformers for image generation, on racial bias. So for instance, she did this very brilliant study asking the model to generate, I don't know, 1,000 images of a terrorist, and then she was measuring the skin tone, these kind of things. So we don't know, we can assess the bias, but for sure there is bias in the system, but we don't know in a systematic way what sort of bias. And then a general problem of transformers, and this is applicable also to other AI systems like machine learning, deep learning. We have a problem of explainability. So qualitative analysis is about tagging parts of a text, interpreting and tagging parts of a text, such as, and now I will oversimplify here, we are speaking about diagnosis, here we are speaking about disclosing the diagnosis with the family, here we are speaking about receiving the diagnosis from the physician. And what you do once you have like all your coded corpus is moving from what I call vertical reading, so a diachronic reading of individual experience, to horizontal reading, so a synchronic reading of like what do people say when they speak about diagnosis across like the possible variations of these experiences depending on X and Y variables. So because of the architecture of these systems, we have issues on explainability. We will not be able to know why this segment of the text has been tagged as diagnosis or receiving the diagnosis or sharing the diagnosis by the system, which is vice versa something that you can do with symbolic AI. Because that is rule-based, and this is something we are doing. We have a small project on financial toxicity, so we have a corpus of patient interviews, and we are using we have developed a symbolic AI system to classify this text, to look for instances of financial toxicity across the text, and we didn't use large language models but symbolic AI, because this way we can have explainability. We can backtrace each and every tagging to a rule which caused it. And then we have these issues of data protection and of technology governance, which are huge issues, which are connected to the topic of representation, to the topic of nuances of cultural sensitivity, which are not intrinsic in how these systems are from a theoretical standpoint, but they are intrinsic in the technological implementations of these systems. Because, for instance, ChatGPT is, well, you don't have, when you're working with ChatGPT, you don't have a piece of software which is running locally on your machine, but you're sending queries to a server which is located somewhere in the Silicon Valley, and you're getting responses back. So there is an issue when you do, like, for instance, the fine-tuning of a model. There is an issue of data protection in that you are sharing with a third party, which is a private company, your data. And if this data is sensitive and non-anonymized, this could be an issue, for example. And there is an issue of governance because, yeah, I mean, if tomorrow these companies decide that the system has to work in a different way, then that's what happens. We have no say in that. So that's another reason for really thinking twice before incorporating these tools in a research process, in a research workflow, because they are not stable over time and they could change without any notice. Still, I am working a lot with AI and on AI. And I think this is, well, on the one hand, a lot of our work is on assessing the risks that are posed by AI. For instance, we developed this little paper. This was like a Friday project. So this is like the sort of work that we have no funding for, and we do in our free time because it's fun. It was in 2021, and I just had access to the first APIs of GPT-2 at the time. And at the time, I was working a lot on infodemics, so like on these epidemics of disinformation and misinformation that can happen and usually do happen during public health crisis. That's like the thing on which, or one of the things on which I'm working the most. And soon the WHO will publish this ethical framework for infodemic management, where me and my colleague Federico have been the rapporteurs. So like that's like what I do the most and what I am usually paid for. But yeah, we were wondering, will it be possible to generate an infodemic or to generate disinformation using these tools? And we designed like a very simple experimental study to see whether that was the case, and we could measure that yes, it is possible. And in the sense that the text generated from this, so that the systems can generate this information, so it is possible to circumvent the blocks that these companies, the safety checks that these companies built in the systems to avoid this. But I mean, it's quite easy to circumvent them. That disinformation is indistinguishable from organic disinformation, so written by people, and it is more convincing. It is more convincing also that like true information generated by these systems. So it's really a double-edged sword in this sense. Another piece of work that we did with AI, and which prompted us to reflect a lot on this issue of data governance, was fine-tuning a model to see whether it would have been able to do two things. One is to classify assisted suicide cases, so the reports from assisted suicide cases. And for that, we used data which are anonymized and publicly available from the Dutch regional bioethics committees. And that was one part of the study. The second part of the study was to see whether we could generate plausible cases, for instance, for medical teaching, for ethics teaching. So based on a system which has, quote unquote, experience of how these sort of ethical dilemmas are addressed in real life by real bioethics committees, so providing books to the librarian, we wanted to see whether giving the librarian a set of variables such as age, gender, due care criteria, diagnosis, and so on and so forth, it could produce cases which were completely fictional but plausible. Because then you have an infinite resource of material that you could use for teaching. And with the model that we used, this was GPT 3.5, we would really love to replicate the study with GPT 4.0. We had a success rate of 60%, so not bad when you consider that you can generate as many cases as you want. So let me check my talking points because I got a bit distracted in the flow. So yeah, I mean, this is a bit the science and the tech and like the potential applications of AI in our fields in ethics, and also a bit of a critical view of like what are the issues that one has to keep in mind when dealing with AI in bioethics. I still think there are some very good potential uses in education, but also some risks. And again, my position is to be as honest as possible. I am not a neo-ludist. I'm not saying that we should refuse this technology altogether, nor I am an enthusiast like a fanboy pushing for adoption of these technologies whatsoever. I try to have a balanced position. I try to be aware of the pros and cons of the benefits and of the risks, also in light of the fact that technologies are not neutral. I think there's been a very long debate on technology neutrality in literature way before AI. We started discussing about these in the early 20th century about whether technology can be neutral or not. I don't think it can be neutral. Especially implementations of technology are not neutral. They embed some values and some value choices, which often are not explicit. And on this note, there is some excellent theoretical work from Joschka Haltaufereide, who started like studying the value assumptions in code on the COVID tracing apps, which were used massively in Europe during the COVID crisis. So like what sort of value assumptions are in there? Are they explicit or not? And this is another thing on which we are eager to work in the future. So yeah, I mean, besides like the obvious stuff, especially when we speak about large language models, the obvious risks of plagiarism, of academic integrity, of having hallucinations in text, which has been generated by a large language model and not properly supervised by a human. We have other issues which I think are relevant and need to be discussed. So equity in access, which is related to technology governance. This stuff is private and it costs money. And there are ways out from these issues with like open science approaches and open source models. And there are some hybrid or full open source models, but then you have other ethical considerations kicking in that an open source model, I mean, when you have a model which is managed by a company which is legally liable for what the model is doing, if the model is misbehaving and I don't know, producing disinformation, you can hold the company responsible, and they have to respond of that. But when the model is open and people can just download it and use it locally, then the risks of having AI-generated synthetic disinformation in huge amounts out there damaging society, that is impossible to mitigate. And on paper, I am a very big fan of open science. Everything I do is open science, but this tension is there and we need to be aware of that. I will send you some papers on this later as well. And then another issue is that of dependency. So for instance, I started using a lot, because English is not my first language, I started using a lot large language models to fine tune my papers, to check the language, to make it sound better. And then I started realizing that my linguistical skills were decreasing because of my reliance on an external model. So I don't do it anymore. I stick with my broken English. I think as long as people can understand me, it's fine. But I mean, besides these issues, there is also a lot of potential in higher education for personalized learning, for instance. This metaphor of the librarian that I use for explaining what a transformer architecture is and how it works, that is a suggestion of a large language models. The input was, I have to explain the concept of a transformer to a non-technical public of academics. What kind of metaphor could I use? And the system came up with this idea of the librarian. So when you have to translate, quote unquote, concepts into metaphors, this is something that these models can do well. And this can be used to deliver knowledge in ways that resonate more and better with people. So this can be used to translate knowledge in something which is more relatable and easier to grasp. Language support is another huge thing. So for instance, and no one in my family is an academic. They cannot read my papers, but they are very curious about the work I do. So I created this little piece of code where you can just give a link to a paper, and the code is retrieving the text of the paper, grasping the main concepts, translating them into metaphors, and then into Italian, so that my parents can have access to the knowledge that I am producing, even when I am too busy to explain them what I am doing. And I think this is extremely cool as a way to democratize knowledge. Of course, it needs supervision, because again, we have the issue of hallucinations. But in a world that needs knowledge to be more democratic, and I think that's like the word for which we all should strive, this could be an amazing tool. And another thing we are experimenting with now, we just got a grant for this, is impersonation. So we know that models are good at impersonating specific characters. You can write a persona as a character, as like some sort of improv theater character. And then you can have the large language model impersonating this persona. So why not patients? And as we have data sets of patient experiences in the form of interviews, well, we can fine-tune models, teaching them, giving them the books, showing them how patients actually speak about specific issues, such as disclosing diagnosis or discussing hard choices or stuff they like. And we can give the model a persona to impersonate, which is a patient advocate with knowledge of the stories, of the individual stories of a bunch of different people, so that we can expose like physicians in training to patients to which they will not have access, and hopefully have them improve their skills in communication. So there are a bunch of areas, a bunch of fields, and these are just some of the ideas that we had in time. I think there are still many more ideas to generate. Where we could, in a very fruitful way, use AI in our work, to democratize our work, to improve our work, to make it faster also, because that's another issue with thematic analysis. I am a big fan of thematic analysis, but to analyze a data set of 50 interviews, I mean, either you have a bunch of people or it takes a lot of time. So it's difficult to be timely with the outcome of your thematic analysis. For instance, we had this collection of interviews. We were collecting interviews with COVID patients in Switzerland during COVID. And some colleagues are still working on these interviews because the interpretation takes time. And if you want to deliver actionable information based on qualitative analysis in the context of a public health emergency, then you have to accelerate qualitative work. And this will be a way to do it so that we can take into account also the lived experiences of people in a way which is appropriate. So I mean, that's like an overview of what we are doing, of the issues that we see, of the potential that we see in these technologies. And I'm gonna post a couple of references in the chat of some of the things that they mentioned. Thank you.
Okay, so Giovanni, you've finished, right? Or is there anything more you want to say? I think that was very well done. Yeah. Grazie, the only word I know in Italian. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And then, one thing which, Giovanni kept reiterating is about the risks. Okay. And as we all know, there's nothing like tech neutrality. I don't want to say there's no net neutrality, but anyway. And also, Giovanni demystified, many things right from programming itself. I mean, actually, some of the terms that he used was like very musical to me, because this is something which I don't do much of nowadays. But it's important to understand, like this whole thing about how we balance, like we were saying earlier also, about, what AI can do and what we let it do. And of course, the large language models and all that also ensure that, because eventually AI tools are also created by humans, which is what I've been, and all of us are trying to say in different ways. So I think somewhere, otherwise, also, of course, having been in the IT industry in India and abroad, I can say what has happened to the young person from OpenAI, the South Asian origin person, which happened in California, the unfortunate passing away. We know that things are, not exactly in black and white, but this is broadly what we call calling out about the unethical stuff which goes on. And like also Giovanni said, and many of us are open source, not just enthusiasts, practitioners, users, but things are only so much open source. And so obviously commerce tends to take the priority everywhere. So I think, Giovanni, thanks again for trying to summarize things in the best way while highlighting risks. And as you say, like we all say, I think AI is something we have to learn to live with, but ensure that we don't overuse it, or let us probably try to caution wherever possible, right? In how to use, or how much to use it. So I will right now again invite Professor Aamir Jafri, about how they think as a practitioner, but they're also a teacher, a professor, of how they would have seen AI being used in various aspects and in various ways. So welcome again, Professor Aamir. Would like to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritash, for the introduction and the correction. Doesn't matter. You got my first name right, which is Aamir, which is fine. And I'm at the Center of Biomedical Ethics and Culture, CBEC for short, at the Sin Institute of Urology and Transplantation, SIUT, in Karachi. But the important thing is you got my other part of introduction, which I was very surprised that you knew, correct, which is my literary lineage from my mother's side. My mother was a very well-known name in Urdu poetry, and known very well to Urdu readers on both sides of our fence that divides our countries. So my the responsibility today is to talk about Gen AI, and I'll focus on higher education. Huda has been talking about her thesis and work that she's done, and how she bypassed or circumvented AI. One, of course, major challenge for her would also be the paucity of information on her topic, which is a very select group of people on what she was talking about. So there was whatever information that is up there in the huge data set up in the web would also be quite biased and skewed. Once Huda's own data joins the masses of data up in the web, I think AI would be a little more brighter when it comes to genital cutting, etc. But right now, yes, you're right, Huda. It's very few relevant pieces of information that AI could have helped you. You've helped AI rather than AI helping you at this point. So, which is fine. We are all helping AI generate um, knowledge base. So, my first encounter with generative AI was right in this office in December of 2022. This is just before we inducted our last academic class in 2023. And that's the first time when my colleague, the junior most colleague in our office, came up and told me about this. And I was quite skeptical at that initially. And then I realized, oh man, this is very interesting. And this is really very interesting. And I really got involved in this. And I asked my daughter, who was at that time in university doing her bachelor's at another city, and she was horrified at how do you know about this? It was as if some sort of a website which I should not have visited, which I have visited. And since then, of course, a lot has changed and it's become mainstream. Um, so January 2022 is when I first realized that this existence of chat gpt, whatever version was then at that time. And then of course the very next month, January, we inducted our new class and we gave them an assignment, and lo and behold, we have what is clearly essay that could not have been produced by a student who had submitted it. Very clear, because we knew his capabilities with language and with information and everything else. And here is Queen's English and superb essays. And we didn't know what to do because this is, and he confronted him and he was swearing on everything holy that no, it's fine. I haven't cheated. I haven't cheated. I put, this is my own effort. And so what do you do with this? So we were, the knee-jerk reflex at that time for us was ban it. AI was banned. Nobody will use it. So every assignment, you will not use AI. Of course, as we used to write all the time, that plagiarism is unacceptable and will result in throwing you out. So was AI at that time. But that was then, a couple of years ago. Of course, our main concern was threat to academic integrity, and that's the whole idea behind an academic program, that you assess, you teach with integrity, and you assess the output with integrity. That's the main thrust. So when we look at intellectual work, that is what we are doing, right? That is what we expect our students to do. Intellectual work would mean tasks that require mental effort, your own mental effort, not your a neighbor's intellectual effort or a machine's intellectual effort, your own intellectual effort, your mental creativity, your critical thinking, innovation. All of these things will reflect in your writing, in your research, in your program design, in programming itself, in problem solving. All of these things are how you assess whether a person has learned something or not that you've taught him or he's supposed to learn. And Gen AI was actually doing a superb job in all of these things. It was doing such a good job that it was it disconnected that output from the doer himself. So we know the students, we know the capability of our students, etc. And we would also see the output and see, no, this couldn't be him, this couldn't be her. In the years past, we would say it was plagiarized or it was somebody else who got to do it. Now we know that your computer did it in 30 seconds. So that was a main challenge of maintaining intellectual honesty. AI was leading to intellectual dishonesty. Therefore, the reflex, the reflex was knee-jerk reflex was just ban it. So, eh, uh, when another entity is producing your the work that you're submitting, how do you assess that student? And this was happening more and more and more and more as AI became an integral part of so many things that were going around us. various forms of generative AI were now there. ChatGPT was just one name. There were so many others that are now integrated. So if you open a PDF in your on your screen, there is a little thing that pops up that says, "You want a summary of this?" and it'll give you an intelligent summary. Giovanni was talking about a summary that was simplified and translated it into Italian so that his family, which was not academic, could understand. That's fantastic. This is But he programmed that, and he said, as he says, that there could be a lot of flaws in that, so you have to actually be aware of that as well. So the summaries are another shortcut that are automatically there. Even if I don't go and ask looking for it, it just pops up on my screen, as is the message that comes up when we switch on to Zoom, that AI, somebody has switched on AI, and whether you're okay with it or not. So there is non-intellectual work that our students do, and there's intellectual work that students do. Then there's some gray areas also. Non-intellectual work for us is calculators. I remember when the first Texas Instrument calculator, it was like a brick in the 1970s that came out. My brother, who was an engineering student at that time, I was a little kid, he acquired it, and everything changed. And there was, of course, this horror that people will not be able to do maths anymore. They will not be able to add 2 plus 2. That didn't happen. That did not happen, because it was not actually intellectual work that the calculator was doing. It was just doing what you were commanding it to do. So it was your command. If your command was lousy, then the result was wrong. Like, but then we move on. We've got spell check. I cannot, for the life of me, spell non-maleficence correctly in my first go. I can't do it for some reason, because of my dyslexia, which I may be having with somewhere hidden. But I don't know. But I can't. But my Microsoft Word fixes it every time, and I'm very grateful to it. So, but that's not intellectual, is it? It's an improvement. It is improvement on my work, but it's not intellectual. And we've always accepted that. Grammarly was also very politely suggesting in a little green squiggle that maybe you should read it. Now it is actually, with the larger versions and the bigger versions and more expensive versions, it is actually rewriting my sentences or suggesting rewritten. So if I accept all of the exchanges, whatever comes on the paper is not what I had written. It's what I had wanted to write, or what my computer thinks I ought to have written, but not what I wrote. Is that mine, or is that a gray area? I'm not sure about that. So these are the things that we grapple with when we're looking at our students' inputs, and as our academic works next session starts, we're also grappling with, we cannot have an absolute ban on AI. So what is it that we can allow them? So, as Giovanni, I think also pointed out, while using his various AI applications, he was able to generate a better output as far as English was concerned. But he mentioned that he was not learning. So there is actually data on this, that while Gen AI increases your performance, it enhances your performance, it decreases your learning ability. So that's another fear. It's a shortcut. Shortcuts are humans are inherent in taking shortcuts. We all take shortcuts, and we regret sometimes wherever we gotten stuck because of this shortcut on our streets, etc. Or I happened to be in last night also. However, in when you're working, when your student is working, and of course there are deadlines, and they're inundated with work, they would automatically take a shortcut, and the shortcut may produce a good result also, but have they learned anything from that, is the question. Then the other question is, do they need to learn this? Do I need to learn how to spell non-maleficence? Because I will always be working on my computer. I hardly now write, because I can't read what I've written on paper. I've written squiggled notes over here, but I can't make head or tail as to what I'd written a short while ago. However, if I'm on my computer and I'm writing down, it'll fix these little things. So why do I even need to live? So these are the questions that my students would ask me, and I don't have a clear answer. So, but in our the AI is predominantly there in both in learning and in assessment. In learning, of course, we use every tool, every modality, the classroom learning. We go to Google to learn. Our students will go over there. Students will ask his friend, etc., etc. All of these things are quite legitimate. AI will also go to AI. Automatically, AI will generate a lot of information, but with the amount of hallucinations, etc., they may be misled, and that's a threat that perhaps with time will reduce, but right now it is a threat, especially for the non-paid version. So that also brings in this, again Giovanni was saying about democracy. This also brings in a little bit of disbalance here. A person who can afford GPT-4 or some other paid version is better off because hallucinations are lesser as compared to someone who does not have access to that. So that's inherent ethical issue, and a disadvantage to some and advantage to others who have deeper pockets. So, but as far as assessment is concerned, we do assess students so that we understand if they have learned what they were supposed to learn. This is done through original work, through examinations, through papers, assignments, presentations, performances. Now, again, at the advent of Chat GPT, and my daughter was in a bachelor's, of course, their teachers also noted that suddenly everybody was A star, A plus student, and there was something wrong. So they switched to handwritten essays, and that added to their own burden. I mean, how do you, people haven't written anything in long script for years, and they couldn't decipher, the teachers couldn't decipher it. Then they started to switch to oral exam, which was also cumbersome and not possible for a class of whatever numbers. So remaining within the practical realm, what can we do? So these are things that we are actually facing right now also. How do you manage them? So there, you can't have a blanket ban as we did. It was irrational. It is not sustainable, and it is not also implementable. It cannot be implemented whether or not we say something. It can be allowed in certain situations, but then what are the situations in which you will allow it, and what is allowable? So it is okay, I guess, to use it to reduce the burden of labor without undermining academic integrity. But this needs to be defined very clearly in the course by the facilitator, by the faculty, as to exactly what they mean by that you can use it, but only so far. It can be used in assessment also if allowed, but with the provision, and these are what various guidelines say, with the provision of the student providing you with whatever prompts they put into the whatever AI application, and also what texts etc they got from the that means for a 3-page paper, and this I've tried myself, 3-page response paper, you will have 17 pages of prompts and what the AI generated. As a teacher, I can't cross check and re-examine. It's not possible for me. So even if I demand such a thing, it is an impractical demand. It just won't work. um, so where we have to then have rules that are actually practical also. So it can be either not allowed, banned, or it can be conditionally allowed in certain situations, when conditions have to be very clear and very precise and practical for the student, as well as for us as faculty or as teachers to be able to implement them. Otherwise, they're useless. Or it can be unconditionally allowed, which I don't see happening at all. It should not be so. Um, so you see, where should AI then be permitted? If I'm saying it in the middle ground and saying no, it should be conditionally permitted, where? So initial brainstorming, for instance, I have an idea, so I Google it. Googling was fine. So I Googled it, and I'll Google some of the ideas here. I AI it, and I find 3 or 4 or 5 different ideas. I read through them. I try to formulate my own ideas, and then put it together. That is one, I think, legitimate area where we could use it. It can be used to search data. Of course, AI lies. I mean, AI has hallucinations. It will give me a reference which does not exist, and when you tell it that it does not exist, it will apologize very politely and give you 4 more references which don't exist also. So that adds a lot of work. But again, this is the free versions. The more expensive versions, the paid versions, I'm sure will have much less of this, and as time goes by, we will have better outputs. But as things are right now, we can't rely on this thing. So can AI be used for initial drafting? So I've got this idea, I've got written this thing up, and then I put it in one of these applications and ask it to say, give me a good draft, and it's a beautiful draft, which I would have taken 17 days to do. They did it in 17 seconds, and it's a fantastic draft. It's very tempting for the student to take it and submit, and that's forget about it. However, for a responsible student and responsible researcher, responsible faculty, you will have to reread it and make sure that this is exactly what you wanted it to be, and change it. Again, as I said, the English may be too good to be true, but it is there, and that has fixed it. Would you then want it? So I've asked actually Chat GPT and written a passage and said, can you distort the English to sound more Indian or Pakistani? And it does it. So, and then if you ask it, then make it Queen's English, and it'll do that as well. So, so that's somewhere. But again, there's a lot of gray areas where we can actually accept these changes to be done and accepted by the AI. And the student, of course, telling us that I've asked it to do this. Can can we ask it to edit? And I have asked various passages. I've written passages and asked it to edit just for my sake of, and it's they've done fantastic editing. um, my own editing is not too bad, so it was I would have been able to reach that area with some more effort, but I would have been not in 3 seconds that it did. However, in a little more time I would have done that. However, somebody else may not have as good command over English and editing. And if you got a 300 word limit, and you can't reduce it under 500 words, and you try and it just drops, you drop 2 words here and 3 drops, AI will do it in 300 words in 3 seconds or less. So is that acceptable? I'm not sure. Exact. I mean, these are things that we will have to, for each course, we will have to think these through and make the rules, and know the rules ourselves, and then implement and tell the students. Students have to be very clearly told as to what is acceptable and what is not. So we have to develop policies, and I think it's too early to develop policies. We can develop guidelines, but not policies are more static and they change over a period of longer gaps, whereas guidelines is for right now. So we can have some guidelines for each course as to what I'm teaching, the nature of my course, the nature of my assessment, and then have some guidance for that. This is acceptable, this is the limit of this, I want this information from you, etc., etc. We need to educate students in its proper use, because it's very tempting to cheat or to take the shortcut, and it is very difficult to remain on the virtuous path. However, that's something that we need to inculcate. In addition to that, we have to teach faculty. The faculty is of the analog era, my era. And you guys are, of course, all digital. But me, coming from the geriatric age group, I've had to learn how to use the keyboard, and you still can't do that. But we have to learn to accept these changes and see where they are applicable and acceptable, and how to do that. First, we have to train ourselves. We have to get more familiar with AI, and after achieving this familiarity, then accept, let the make the rules, and put in the bars. And of course, there has to be monitoring and enforcement of whatever we ask the students to do. So, for instance, the University of Toronto will say that in certain cases that it is prohibited to use AI tools, and this is considered unauthorized aid and a form of cheating. That is very clear for some of the courses. University College London has conditionally allows and says students need to describe the generation prompts, process the prompts, the outputs, etc., have to be given. As I said, in this, if you are getting a 3-page essay and 16 pages of data that went into it, then it's impossible for you to tally that. Um, we need to, but enforcement is important. I think we need to make the rules, and we need to enforce them with students being told to undertake to sign some undertaking also, in which they say that I am, according to the rules, I have used AI, and in this fashion, this was the AI I used, and these are the prompts I generated, and I've reviewed that, and ownership is mine. So the buck stops with the student, not with the AI. So if there's some screw up in the data or in the information or whatever it is, it is the responsibility of the student, and the student will be penalized for that or scored negatively for that. Not it is not the AI that does it. So I think I'd like to end by saying that AI is a reality, even for people like me. AI now has come to stay, and it has integrated itself without sometimes seamlessly. We don't even know when we are in getting off the screen and into the AI realm. AI, by the way, it has got a Google type of a search engine now, and I was playing with it only yesterday. Very excited. So it's just come. There AI has ethical usages. We need to know what they are. We need to understand them, and then we need to make the rules and limits. And these limits cannot be universal. They have to be, I think, contextualized to the tasks, to the kind of study that we are the students expected to do, the kind of output, and these have to be then very clearly defined for each student, each course, and then applied. This is a new task, but we have to learn to do this first ourselves and then go to the students. So with that, I think thank you very much for your attention, and I'm hoping that there would be a good discussion afterwards. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Aamir. Yeah, I mean, I Googled you before, checking with Swaleha. Yeah, I Googled about you. Yeah, just like you said, we AI people. So we always say we Google you or we Google topics, right? And sometimes, and almost, more often than not, I believe, very reluctantly have to admit this, that sometimes Google seems to know more about us than we do about ourselves. Okay, so that's where I got the Urdu poetry link. It's also because I think I was, raised by a teacher grandfather who made me fall in love with all kinds of poetry. Yeah, but, you just literally, as you say, told where the buck stops and also summarized very well, because coming from a family of multiple generations of teachers, yeah, who are more teachers first and then parents and aunts and uncles for me, I know what it is like, to uh, be as encouraging and as affirmative a teacher, right? Because sometimes people, students, like you said, yeah, it might improve your performance, seemingly, but not your learning. And then unfortunately in this world of everything is graded numerically almost, right? You either get alphabetic grades or you get number marks, right? Everything is about being on top. And or even in this data driven world, everything is about reduced to numbers, unfortunately. And that is what sometimes you cannot, more so, actually, this is also bringing out kind of a dichotomy, because on one side we say AI seems to be not doing very well on representation, right? um, not just of knowledge but of communities and of people or whoever. And on the other side, but it might be, if they have access, people from say lesser privileged groups or backgrounds are likely to use AI, because as you said, that very fantastic and very realistic example of some papers of some student who's perhaps having some challenges of language and familiarity or understanding of something, has used AI or any equivalent tool to to get to write the best assignment or essay or whatever. But you were able to, because that student. But what if it was like, for instance, when we used to go to high school or middle school, your teachers probably are new to you and you are new to them. So the first time they would say, at that time it was only about handwriting, handwriting something. So they will understand whether you're a squiggler or you are a good writer, you write legibly. Plus also they want to understand your presentation style, your abilities and stuff, right? But in a class where again you multiple assignments are given, you probably will take some time to get familiar with the student's abilities, right? So that time, how do you evaluate whether the student is really capable of producing that kind of an output, or is it some tool? And I'm really glad that you brought up the examples of things like Grammarly, and because I think these are very practical examples of how ICT, as it has become, yeah, information and communications technology, that is sort of helping you in a way, but also sometimes, not challenging you enough. That's what I also sometimes think. Sometimes I would be like, telling myself, oh my gosh, my English is not so bad that I have to rely on Grammarly or spell check or, anything like that. But if I want to flip things a little bit, because I was born with a holy heart, basically I underwent PhD closure. So I remember in one of pardon if this is a bad example, because my ignorance of biotech is very high. I thought that in the 70s, when I had to be quickly operated upon to survive, they used the heart lung machine. And to me, that was a very broad, or one of the things where somewhere, a bit of, say, some kind of hard coding or some kind of human intelligence was stored into it, because the heart lung machine has to decide when it has to switch, much as there's so much of responsibility on a surgeon. But I don't know, but to me at least, some of these, now modern sort of biomedical engineering and all that is also using AI in very different ways, maybe not in very obvious ways, where it leaves the decision making, sometimes very critical decision making, and assisting, healthcare providers, not to take away any credit from healthcare providers. But, I don't even know if this is a right example, but if not, then I would request you to throw some light on that. If, the modern biomedical engineering devices, machines are good examples of, like something like AI based tools, but hardware tools, right?
So you want me to respond? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just give it a shot. Yeah. So, so when you had your VSD, your heart, the hole in the heart fixed, at that time it was a very clear mechanical device, which the doctor would switch on and switch off. So there was brain was only one. I mean, only the human being's brain, and the decision, the timing, and all of that was just it was just bypassed. Your heart was stopped, and they will fix the hole, and then your heart was then restarted by that. But for that duration, it was the external machine that was pumping blood through your body. But as things have grown now, so there's, for instance, example of the AI looking at echocardiograms of children. The echocardiogram interpretation is a very subjective thing. The operator of the echo machine puts the probe, and the sound waves go in and the reflections come out, and then you see a pattern, you hear a pattern, and then you make a decision and a diagnosis. But millions and millions of these have been put into the systems now. These can now be operated and done by anyone, and the AI generated diagnosis comes up, which is actually more accurate in coming up with the right diagnosis than human generated, because human error is also there here. And this has been checked and cross-checked, and so this is just not for imaging and echoes, etc. So these are one areas where AI has actually shown benefit already in diagnostics. So they've come a long way. So if I so now, yes, much of the decision making is AI assisted, but not AI done only. So AI suggests this thing, it is reconfirmed by the human eye. And but this is also a growing phase. As the growing phase grows, and you know that in fact it's the AI that's correct more times than the human being. It will be just the AI generated decision that will come out later on. But at this point, the machine is still learning, and we are still seeing how much it has learned.
Okay, thank you so much. So I will quickly request any of the listeners here. We have some very familiar names and people who are also.
Giovanni, sorry for interjecting. Giovanni had a point. So
Okay.
put on the chat. Wanted to make a few comments, and then we have a very
Mhm.
lively chat that is
Yeah.
also happening on the chat box. But Giovanni, you had some points to make.
Okay, sorry. I'm
No.
unable to see for some technical reasons.
No problem.
Thank you.
No problem. It's basically just a couple of points I was thinking about during this last part of our discussions. So the first is about these submit and forget AI papers about which Aamir was speaking. And I think we have to be honest on that. There, the issue is not that we have the technical means for doing this. There, the issue is that the academic system incentivizes these sort of practices because our evaluations are based on how many papers you published, not on the quality of the content. And this is a structural problem with which academia has been struggling since way before AI, since at least the 70s. If you look at the number of papers published on any topic, and if you compare, and this is not a rant like about how the good old times were better. That's not the point. But the point is, as long as we don't change the way that we use for evaluating careers in academia, no matter the technical context, this will be an issue. We will still have, in any case, bad papers, or in Switzerland, there is a name for that practice, which is cutting the sausage. So instead of publishing this one thing as a nice standalone study, you cut it in 6 papers because it's going to be good for your career. So that is the problem. Related to this, I think we have to be very clear as a community and go through this exercise of, this is what we have done with the WHO for the entire infodemics management thing. So we try to assess what are the issues at stake. So what are the bad things that we want to avoid? What are the values that we should pursue? So we have like some clear priority setting. And then based on that and on a thorough knowledge of what these technologies can and cannot do, based on that, we can craft guidelines, implementation guidelines. But we need to have these principles stated very clearly and in written form as a reference. So what is the point? And we need to be a bit specific. So democratized knowledge, for instance, can mean many different things. We need, if we agree on the fact that one of the aims of academia should be to democratize knowledge, then we should be then explicit on what do we mean by democratizing knowledge. And I'd like to emphasize once again the need to be aware of the technologies, so to engage also to some degree with these technologies, to know their characteristics and strengths and limitations. Because, for instance, I mean, it happened to me quite often that either when, as a reviewer, checking like a scoping review or a systematic review, or as an author while making the protocol for such a review, to have like in the paper sentences such as in the inclusion criteria, language is English, right? Because I mean, I read English and Italian and some French and some German, but usually it boils down to that. And then a whole bunch of knowledge which is generated somewhere else in the world, in parts where English is not the main language, are simply like off the table of science. And I'd like to show you, is it possible to share the screen? Because if I try to, I cannot.
Yeah, you'll have the rights as the co-host to share the screen.
No, it tells me that the screen sharing is not active.
No,
Because
yeah.
this is not the co-host right now, so Leha, just let me make
Yeah,
him.
just make him make Giovanni.
If it is not a hassle, if it's possible.
No, it's quite easy. Now you should be able to
Oh, good.
just check
Yeah.
once.
So now you should be able to see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah.
So it's kind of a small and quick demo. This is a notebook LM from Google. I don't know if you ever tried it. You should. It's really interesting. It's a combination of this symbolic, rule-based AI and of a large language model. And this is intended to interrogate documents. So let's try to imagine that while doing my systematic review on this or that, I end up having a bunch of papers in Portuguese from Brazil, which could be relevant in the context, for instance, of infodemics, because the Brazilian colleagues wrote a lot on infodemics because they experienced a lot. Through this interface, I can load my documents and interrogate the documents. So here what you read is a summary of the file. Now there is only one file loaded. And it says, from a book manuscript addressing the complex interplay between science, ethics, and society, the authors, a biologist and philosopher, explore contemporary challenges such as pandemics, infodemics, and the erosion of trust in science and politics. They critique the current state of science communication, highlighting its shortcomings and proposing solutions to foster critical thinking. All of this is true. This is like the draft of the book that we will publish next year, me and this colleague of mine, Federico. And then I can interrogate this document. So asking, for instance, does the book cite any mythology, which is a weird question that you would ask to a book about the interplay between science, ethics, and society. But yes, the book cites the Epic of Gilgamesh to illustrate how humans have been imagining the future since the beginning of history. The epic written blah, blah, blah. This is information from the book. And then you can look at the text so that you can check whether this is an hallucination or not. And maybe translate this passage, which is in Italian, because I wrote this in Italian. And you can ask follow-up questions even. So again, if the purpose is to democratize knowledge in the sense of, for instance, including in our reviews literature that is written in languages that we do not understand, then yes, this is a way to do it. And that's a very good example, in my opinion, on why we need to engage with this technology, why we need to know what it is able to do, what are the limitations, what are the strengths, with a critical approach, not with any sort of techno-optimism like, technology will fix it, no matter the problem. But we need to know that this stuff exists.
Okay, thank you, Giovanni. Anyone else has any? We're almost, ending this because of the time constraints. But anyway, anybody has any important questions or comments? I mean, yeah. Otherwise, I will also request Huda to make some closing remarks. But before that, anyone has any particular question or comment?
Quick question.
Yeah.
Quick question. So I think a lot of it has been on text related stuff. So I have a follow-up question because I actually ran into this particular problem very recently about that. I wanted to translate some text, which was not text. I wanted to translate a video, a song actually, which was in one particular language, and I couldn't find the the text anywhere of that. So I wanted to translate that into a language that I could understand. Either it could have been English or Urdu, but it was in another regional language of Pakistan. So is there any tool? Because I feel a lot of it is really on text and the written word. And I was wondering if there are other tools. And by the way, I use AI quite a bit now. I was initially very skeptical of it, but I've used it for boosting my creativity, etc. as well. So there has been that shift as well. So just that particular question.
Dr. Aamir was raising his hand.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you could have actually walked into my room and I could have answered your. So, Swalia, just play your song, that is a Sindhi song, and capture the lyrics on your phone in Sindhi language. Then put that in Google Translate. It'll give it to you in English or Urdu. Basically, you have to get a transcript, and transcripts are very easy, no problem. Yeah, even an old person like me knows this. Yeah.
We have a similar problem in Switzerland with all the regional dialects. Some of them are super strange and quite different from standard German. To give you an example, like in standard German, you will say auf Wiedersehen. So the verb see is sehen. In Schweizerdeutsch is luege. Okay, it's not even. It's not even related. And then you have a lot of regional variation from canton to canton. For transcribing the interviews of patients coming from, and we let them speak in the regional dialect because it's part of their experience, it's part of their identity, and this is something that we want to acknowledge and that we want to value as well. But then it's difficult to work with the data because the language for me is super difficult. So there is another API, another model. It's again a transformer from OpenAI, which is called Whisper, which is supporting Swiss German and the regional variations of Swiss German and is able to translate. Well, in fact, it is a translation. So it is transcribing and translating at the same time from like regional variations of Swiss German to Hochdeutsch, to standard German.
Thank you, Giovanni, for that, very simple, straightforward answer. Yeah, so again, the last call for questions or comments.
We have a hand up from feedback. We have a hand up from feedback. I think someone wants to ask any question from there. Feedback.
I think that is
Yeah.
Swaleha. Yeah?
Yes.
No.
No. We have Farid, I guess, there. Is it Farid?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Farid, zoom
Hello.
in so that we can see you. Zoom in.
Can you hear me? Is my voice audible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So my question was related to the example Dr. Aamir gave in his talk related to the invention of calculators. The initial argument criticizing the Luddites, the earlier Luddites, or those who oppose these new technologies was that by outsourcing what labor or menial work we were doing by our own hands to technology, we'll be getting more time to do more important, significant stuff that we as a human do. And over the course of history, we have been outsourcing all that we do, like calculating, writing, copy editing, creating songs, making animations, all other things. So, what is that thing we need to spare time from outsourcing all these things to technology? And in the end, what is that thing that makes us human that we'll be doing in the end?
Going to the beach. Have your priorities right, man. Sorry, I was.
I
Yeah.
agree. Or flying paragliders, or skiing, or playing with your kids or with your cats.
That was the ideal that initial argument had in mind, but as we move forward, we stop doing those things we were doing in the history, but we don't get that much free time which earlier people used to have in their life. So all that time we think that we'll get as free time, leisure time, that is all gone.
No, but Farid, I think another thing is that perhaps at so when I was researching for my first article, I would go to the library, take the Medicus indexes or whatever it was called. It was like a phone book, leaf through it, find a reference to an article, then go to the library, find that particular journal, take that out and photocopy it. That was the whole now I do it in seconds, at least this part, and I can do more research, I can do more writing, I can do more reading. It depends on how much time and effort you want to apply on just one paper, or maybe you can write more than one paper during the same time. It's just, of course, you generate more work also for yourself. So if your priority is more papers, etc., now the time taken to do 2 or 3 parallel researches was not possible when you were doing everything for every step, for every point yourself 20 years ago. So I think it's a balancing game, but these things have helped and continue to help, but we need to define as to how much help is acceptable.
Thank
So
you,
Laik
Professor.
has been writing some, yeah. Sorry, Ritash,
Yes.
I'm just interjecting. Laik has been writing some interesting thing in the chat, and now they have, and this should also be the last comment that we take because you're already at 7-8. So yeah, Laik. Thank you.
Yeah, and after this, I'm going to invite Huda for any, closing remarks.
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
Thank you very much. My only point is, as I see Dr. Aamir said that, and others have been resonating on the same. We have not been used to doing things with technology, but then eventually we get used to doing that. Isn't it only a matter of time that we will all get okay with AI, as well as we are okay with the computers and the calculators and everything else? Dr. Amir talked about index medicus. I remember that was a skill that was expected out of a researcher, which no more is the case. We don't consider that as a useful skill anymore. So it's probably going to be a different skill set, in my opinion. If anyone would please share their thoughts too on that. Thank you.
Also, maybe Huda can also, answer or offer her response to any of this, because we have heard her only at the beginning. I mean, I know this was directed towards Professor Aamir, but I think, any of you can respond to this, I think.
I don't have much to say about the comment and the question that was posed, but I do want to add to what Farid just said. Maybe I'll let Dr. Aamir later take up the question and comment. And I mean, I do understand, I think, where he's coming from because we live in this culture of producing and corporatization. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that has seeped into our personal lives, our professional lives, and it will be a part of AI and how we're always producing knowledge, producing papers, using it to do this and do that. It has definitely helped make tasks easier. I've recently started using it to simplify theoretical concepts. I think that's very beneficial, but I always go back and review and reassess because I know there's a lot of like misquoted stuff and a lot of hallucinations. I think Dr. Amr mentioned. So I think it's always good to rethink when something's new and to reassess it, but to completely ban it, I think that is obviously that's not the way to go. And I think it's important to also consider that the advent of generative AI is also helpful with languages, and English is not everybody's first language. And I think I've heard a lot of students and colleagues talk about how it has been helpful for them to communicate to their ideas and even their writing using AI. So I think that needs to be considered too. And if we talk about open knowledge and free knowledge, I think AI can be a part of that, but how we shape it is up to us. We are the ones who shape and mold it, so we need to be very responsible about it. And the other thing I wanted to add to what Farid was saying was I think our reliance sometimes on technology and AI, generally speaking, I think it's led to, if I might say so, like a burnout and an exhaustion. I might be wrong, but I don't think human beings were built to like sit at their computers for like 6 hours a day and do this. There is something that is very damaging about it, but I'll leave that up to the psychologists and the doctors. But yeah, that's all I have to add right now. I think it is important to allow AI, but how we allow it, how we shape it. I think a lot of young students do want to use AI, and I've read a few stories online where they were actually measures were taken against students because they were using AI, or they wrote papers where some of the language, like delve or landscape, these are words I used way before ChatGPT even came out. So sometimes I think they feel they're being accused of copying stuff even when it's not being copied. So there's, I think, a lot to sift through and to decide. And in order to do that, I think we need to collectivize and use our different backgrounds and where we come from and our privileges or lack of it to shape how we're using AI. So that's all I have to add. I'll hand over to Professor Amr so he can take over and answer the question. Thank you.
Yeah, Professor Aamir, yeah, your
So
turn.
no,
And
yeah. So if I remember correctly, what Laiko Zamasa was talking about was how it has become integral part of our lives, and that is true. I mean, when you said that, when I initially also said that 2 years ago, the first encounter, and we said this is not for us. This is absolutely not on, as we did for plagiarism. Now plagiarism is still not on. However, AI is on in certain fashions. How much it is on, we don't know. It is becoming and has already become an integral part of various systems. Your computer, you pop on your computer, your phone, etc. All of these things have some sort of an AI application going on, which helps you, or which you can utilize. Even when you're not utilizing it, it's out there, and in many ways it gets seamlessly integrated into the work that you're doing. So it's not a thing for the future, it is a thing right now. Huda, while you're right about the hallucination, etc., and the need, which will always be there, even when hallucinations are much less, or even completely eradicated in future, maybe that can happen. We will still have to go back, review our what AI has spilled out, and in order to for ownership we have to review it, read it, and modify it so that it reflects us and not the machine. That's very important, and that is an area where the old researchers, I mean, people who have already been doing it, who've migrated into the AI era, will be able to understand. However, a student who's born in the AI era will not be able to understand this. That is my problem, and I don't know how we will address this. But when they find this as a normal thing, that it does it, why should I do it when it is doing it and it's got such a good answer, it's got the solution? So why should I, when I can order in food, why should I cook? So it's an example. But yeah, so we're all learning, and the same South Asian Forum being done 2 years from now may have a completely different outlook on most of the things that we've talked about right now. So I suggest you do this again in 2 years' time. Call us.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, do you want to add
No
something?
problem. I would just have a closing remark on this topic of like what would be the role of us humans in such a world. And there is one important thing that we didn't say yet, like besides going on the beach and flying paragliders and playing with kids and cats. One thing that we, I mean, that as far as I can imagine will be hard to replicate is the ability to generate new ideas, to come up with questions, to make hypotheses, like not the hypotheses that you make once you have your data, but the wild ones that you can generate when you think about the world. When you go out there and look at, I don't know, how people queue at the hospital and what sort of health-related stuff they discuss one with another at the bar. This sort of work, identifying new research questions, generating new hypotheses, and having ideas, this is something that I cannot imagine being automated anytime soon. So that is like an area where we can capitalize on the freed time that we can gain from automation, being able to come up with new, bigger, and more clever ideas.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and also, Huda's very important point on responsible AI, which she said, in her closing remarks. I think, yeah, it's a balance of all that. And I think I agree with you all that, and I hope also that, AI will not anytime soon replace humans. I don't think it's possible. I think that way we can be smarter. Yeah, right. Whether we're smarter than fifth graders or not, I think we can be smarter than AI, right? To sort of ensure that it doesn't take over, because, like we said, the fundamental thing is humans are creators of AI, right? And yeah, maybe it's a naive hope, but anyway. And again, thank you all for joining, and please stay connected. We will, return with more diverse and interesting topical sessions. Okay. And advanced wishes for the holidays and upcoming 2025. And yeah, shukran, shukriya, Khudafiz. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Khudafiz.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All the best. Yeah.
Thank you very
Bye,
much.
everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.